Marlon Brando was never just a movie star. He was a cultural earthquake, the actor who shattered Hollywood's stiff traditions, redefined masculinity on screen, and showed the world what raw, unfiltered human emotion could look like. But behind the genius, behind the fame and the revolutionary performances, Brando lived a private life far more complicated, tender, and unconventional than the public ever knew. For decades, the world has obsessed over his romances with women. His affairs with actresses, models, and cultural icons filled tabloids for half a century. But as Brando grew older, he began speaking more openly about himself, his desires, and the fluidity of his attractions. He rejected labels, refused categories, and once casually remarked, "Homosexuality is so much in fashion, it no longer makes news. I've had homosexual experiences, and I'm not ashamed." It was a moment that startled Hollywood. Because for Brando, a man raised in the rigid social expectations of 1930s and 40s, to openly admit to same-sex relationships was revolutionary. Yet he had lived that truth quietly for decades. And when biographers, close friends, and witnesses later revealed details of Brando's private relationships, a new portrait of the actor emerged. Vulnerable, emotionally hungry, and willing to love in ways the public never imagined. Today, we explore four of the men who shaped Brando's emotional life, men who influenced his identity, challenged his boundaries, or left deep marks on his heart. Some relationships are confirmed. Others are supported by long-standing testimony, biographer accounts, and eyewitness reports. But all reveal a man whose private world was far richer and more complex than the headlines ever suggested. Of all the revelations about Brando's private life, none hit as hard as the one involving legendary comedian Richard Pryor. In 2018, Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, spoke publicly about her late husband's relationship with Brando, confirming what had long been whispered among insiders. The two men had indeed been lovers. Her statement came after record producer Quincy Jones casually mentioned the affair during an interview. When the media immediately questioned his claim, Jennifer Pryor stepped in and said, "It was the 70s. Drugs were good. Sex was free. They had a great time together." That was the 1970s, an era of decadence, experimentation, cultural rebellion, and collapsing boundaries in American entertainment. Pryor and Brando were two of the most powerful, charismatic, and unpredictable forces in Hollywood, both burning with genius and constantly battling their own demons. They were men who lived intensely, worked intensely, and felt intensely. Their connection, according to those close to them, was brief but volcanic. Not a long romance, but a moment of chaotic overlap. Two icons drawn together by charisma, drugs, mutual fascination, and a total disregard for society's rules. It was daring, wild, and surprising even to those who knew them best. Years later, Pryor himself spoke frankly about his own sexuality, writing that his experiences with men were part of the roller coaster ride of his youth. Brando, too, spoke openly near the end of his life about being attracted to both women and men. The Pryor-Brando affair may have lasted only weeks, but it was one of the few relationships with a man that multiple public figures have openly confirmed. Even today, the idea of two such titans, one the godfather of modern acting, the other the godfather of modern comedy, sharing a brief, intimate moment still shocks the world. But for Brando, it was simply another example of his refusal to live inside society's expectations. If Brando and Pryor were the explosive surprise, then Brando and James Dean are the story people want to believe, the one wrapped in rumor, obsession, contradiction, and decades of speculation. Unlike the Pryor relationship, this one is not confirmed. But the rumors have been persistent for 60 years. Their story begins when James Dean, still unknown and desperate for a breakthrough, reportedly became obsessed with Brando's persona. The brooding rebel, the emotionally raw outsider, the actor who had reinvented what masculinity on screen could be. Dean began studying Brando's methods, his movements, even his voice. He followed him into the same acting circles, approached the same directors, and began mirroring him so closely that Brando's close friend Carlo Fiore reportedly confronted Dean and told him to stop copying Marlon. Many biographies claim Dean's fascination bordered on fixation, and several people close to both men later reported that Dean frequently pursued Brando, attempting to pull him into a sexual relationship. Some witnesses describe Brando as aloof, amused, even annoyed, a cat-and-mouse dynamic where Dean chased the older actor, hoping to win his approval, his mentorship, or perhaps something more intimate. According to one biographer, Brando supposedly allowed Dean to visit him, but refused to commit emotionally, telling him, "I don't say yes and I don't say no. I let you stay." That line, ambiguous and intimate, has fueled decades of speculation. But there was also a darker side to the rumors. Some have suggested that if anything did happen, it may have involved a power imbalance. Brando as the established star, Dean as the vulnerable newcomer desperate for attention and guidance. A few accounts even describe a dynamic where Brando allegedly kept Dean emotionally off balance, giving him scraps of intimacy while maintaining distance. Whether these stories are exaggerated, misremembered, or rooted in truth, no one alive today can say for certain. What is known is that Dean spoke about Brando constantly, imitated him obsessively, and died tragically young, leaving behind a tangle of mysteries and half-told stories. Brando rarely spoke publicly about Dean. When he did, his tone was cool, dismissive, and distant. But the rumors have never died. And perhaps the reason is simple. Both men embodied a new, emotionally raw masculinity. Both men rejected labels. Both men were unpredictable, rebellious, and deeply private. Whether or not they were ever lovers, their connection and the mythology surrounding it remains one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. And then there is the story that is not rumor at all, but the emotional center of Brando's life. Wally Cox was not a sex symbol. He was not a Hollywood rebel, nor an icon of masculinity. He was quiet, gentle, funny, and physically small, the opposite of the towering presence Brando projected. And yet, for more than 30 years, Cox was the only person Brando ever described as his true soulmate. They grew up together in the same neighborhood. They were childhood friends before fame touched either of them. When the world began treating Brando like a demigod, larger than life, intimidating, mercurial, Cox remained the one person who spoke to him as an equal, as a boy from Omaha, as a human being. Their relationship defied categories. Some who knew them believed they were lovers at times. Others believed they were brothers in spirit, never sexual but deeply intimate. Brando himself kept the truth ambiguous, insisting that love doesn't fit neatly into boxes. What is certain is the depth of Brando's devotion. He once told a friend that Cox was the only person he could fully trust. When Cox died unexpectedly in 1973, Brando was shattered. He was so devastated that he took custody of Cox's ashes and kept them with him for the rest of his life. According to friends, Brando sometimes slept with the ashes beside him. He talked to them. He kept them in his bedroom for decades, refusing to part with them until the day he died. After Brando passed, the two men's ashes were finally scattered together, their remains returning to the earth as they had lived, side by side. In a life filled with chaos, excess, broken marriages, countless affairs, and emotional instability, Wally Cox was the one constant, the one anchor, the one love, however one chooses to define it, that truly endured. The final story is different from the others. It involves no celebrity icon, no tabloid legend, no household name. It is the quietest of the four relationships, and the one that, according to those closest to Brando, wounded him the deepest. In the 1950s, while living and working in Europe, Brando fell into a romance with a man whose name he kept hidden for decades. The details of the relationship are sparse, known only through fragments shared with assistants and notes in Brando's personal writings. But the emotional impact was unmistakable. According to Brando's longtime assistant, he was deeply in love with this man, perhaps more than he ever admitted publicly. The relationship seemed to offer Brando something rare: peace, tenderness, emotional safety. But it ended suddenly when the man rejected him. The reasons remain unclear. Social pressure? Fear? Brando's own volatility? No one knows. But the rejection devastated him. His assistant described Brando sitting alone, unable to speak, as if wounded in a way no film critic or failed romance with a woman had ever wounded him before. Unlike his affairs with women, which he often joked about or dismissed, Brando never spoke lightly about this relationship. The pain remained sharp even decades later. He mentioned the man only a few times in his life, always with sadness, always with regret. It was a private heartbreak, one he carried silently through fame, marriages, divorces, scandals, and awards. And it reveals a truth many people never understood about Brando. Beneath the swagger, beneath the myth, beneath the masculine bravado he projected on screen, he was a man who felt deeply, sometimes too deeply, for his own good. If there is one thread that connects all four of these relationships, Pryor, Dean, Cox, and the unnamed European lover, it is Brando's absolute refusal to let society define him. He once said, "Like a large number of men, I, too, have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed. I have never paid much attention to what people think of me." In the conservative culture of his era, such a statement was astonishing. But for Brando, it was simply truth. He believed that human desire was fluid, that attraction was about connection, not categories, that love was something that transcended gender, performance, and public expectation. He grew up in a broken home full of violence, alcoholism, and emotional neglect. He spent his life searching for tenderness and trust, things he rarely found in Hollywood's ruthless world. Sometimes he found them in women. Sometimes he found them in men. But he never allowed himself to be defined by whom he loved. Hollywood, of course, was not ready for this. The studio system carefully hid these aspects of Brando's life for decades. Agents buried rumors. Publicists created distractions. Directors refocused media attention on the women he dated. And Brando played along, sometimes mocking the system, sometimes exploiting it, but never revealing the whole truth. It was only later in life, after fame had lost its thrill, after scandals had faded, after he had outlived many of the people he had once loved, that he began to speak more openly, not proudly, not defiantly, simply honestly. And in doing so, he helped quietly shift the conversation about masculinity and sexuality in Hollywood. These four men, each so different, reveal four sides of Brando's heart. Richard Pryor showed his wild, chaotic, experimental side. James Dean represented obsession, desire, and the dangerous power dynamics of early fame. Wally Cox was his emotional home, the one person he trusted without fear. The unnamed European actor embodied his deepest heartbreak, the wound that never fully healed. Together, these stories show a Brando the world rarely saw. A man capable of fierce devotion, tenderness, confusion, impulsiveness, and emotional vulnerability. A man who loved widely, unpredictably, and sometimes painfully. A man who refused to be predictable on screen, and refused to be predictable in life. In the end, Brando remains one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. But understanding these relationships brings us closer to the truth behind the legend. A truth he lived quietly, bravely, and entirely on his own terms.